Welcome to the WSP Anticipate podcast. I'm your host, John Gillespie, a transport and mobility engineer and a leader of our WSP Future Ready initiative for the Middle East. So today we're going to talk about future mobility and in particular e-scooters. Worldwide e-scooter usage is booming, with it forecast to surpass 500 million rides globally this year. They divide city legislation across the world and are either perceived as an accident waiting to happen or the solution to our elusive first last mile problem. To join me in this topic is Jaideep, who is the co-founder and CEO of FENIX, an e-scooter service that has recently rolled out across Abu Dhabi, Fujairah, Doha, Bahrain and Ras Al Khaimah. Formerly of both Cirque and Kareem, Jaideep identifies with a life without so much focus on the private car, noting in a recent interview, mobility is a tax which we all pay to access opportunity. It's a regressive tax. The less you make, the more you pay as a share of your income. We want to make mobility more affordable and accessible to a vast majority of the population. So welcome, Jaideep. Thanks for coming on to the podcast. So I think it's a good place to start. What's your views on future mobility and where do e-scooters come into the mix?
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you for that introduction. I'm very excited to be here. When we talk about future mobility, I think there are many trends that are in progress, right? Electrification, autonomous, and of course, sharing are mega trends that people, I think industry watchdogs have observed. I think another trend is the unbundling of the car and having different form factors for different use cases. When we think of what the future may hold, we need to think about a multimodal transportation network, not just the car-centric monopoly that is predominant today, especially in the Middle East, with these different business models of sharing, subscription, and ownership. And of course, electrification and autonomy being part of that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think you've highlighted it there. The Middle East does have a very car-centric culture. So what are you doing? How are you trying to get people out of the cars in the Middle East?
I mean, you guys are experts on transport planning, and so you're very familiar with this concept of induced demand, or like in Dubai, as they say, build it and they will come. Right? So you build roads for cars. Of course, that's what people use as cars, because that's what the infrastructure is there for. When you offer choice, though, you will see behavior changes. And so there has been a lot of armchair sort of diagnosis about like the Middle East market landscape for mobility, right? A lot of people are like, there's no biking culture. Who's going to ride a scooter? It's so hot. I mean, I've heard it all. but allow me to go a little bit further on this, right? Having worked in mobility for many years, like first in ride hailing with Kareem and with Grab, and then in micromobility, right? I think big picture, like what people care about with transportation are really three things, right? It's affordability, convenience, and experience. That is really market agnostic. In all geographies, this is what people care about. Rich economies, poor economies, or emerging economies, hot, cold, liberal, conservative. Mobility needs are still universal. And that's where we see, micromobility, the right size for the right ride, outperforms the car on these dimensions for the primary use case of the car, which is single passenger urban travel. When you bring this product offering to the Middle East, we see people just naturally gravitate towards it. It's organic product market fit, just like we've seen everywhere else in the world, because for single passenger short distance trips, right, micromobility is quicker, right? You take the shortest path, you go against the traffic, you go between buildings, right? You don't have to wait for traffic lights, you don't have to wait for ride hail to pick you up, you don't have to walk to where your car is parked and look for parking on the other end, right? It's door to door. It's also the most affordable because it's a much smaller vehicle with it's self-driving, right? There's no private chauffeur, right, driving around, adding to the labor cost. And of course, it's 1% the mass of a car, right? And it's the most enjoyable. It's a lot of fun. So it's like no surprise that people here are actually adopting it and loving it.
Yeah, so I'll just take you back slightly. So you said build it and they will come, which has essentially what Phoenix have done. You guys have rolled out pretty quickly, I think it needs to be said, across a lot of different regions in the Middle East. Uh, where are you building? Where are you perceiving that demand to be for e-scooters?
And it's almost hard to believe, but our view is that this is a massive market that is extremely under appreciated. This is not just like a Dubai opportunity, right? Dubai is like the shiny object that like everyone in the region focuses on. But mobility, like I was saying, is the mass market solution. We are finding demand for micromobility in smaller towns and cities like Fujairah, right, 200,000 people. Ras Al Khaimah, 400,000 people. Huge demand for micromobility. Everyone needs to move. So we just need to give them choice and options, right? And that's something that we're doing, I think, a little bit differently than some of the other companies that have approached this sector, even globally. We're not trying to shoehorn one product for everyone. By product, I mean vehicle type and business model, right? Like the shared e-scooters, right? That's kind of what's really seen a lot of growth globally, what everyone talks about, and we love it. We love that product. We think it gives a lot of convenience to people. I mean, you find it outside your door, you ride it, for a few minutes, you get to your destination, you just drop it off. I mean, it's super. It's not able to reach everyone because one, there are no approvals in a lot of places for shared scooters, right? Even here in Dubai, right? There are 5 neighborhoods in all of Dubai which have shared e-scooters today. Most of the people who live in Dubai don't have access to it, right? So that's why we see like a huge owned market here, right? You see people who have their own scooters. So many people have bought their own scooters and are riding it to the metro and in their neighborhoods and to get around. Just like with cars, right? There's a private and there's a shared segment, right? And so one innovation that we've introduced with Phoenix is it's kind of a hybrid. It is a subscription service, a private subscription service called My Phoenix, where you get your own scooter delivered to your house and you pay a flat monthly fee for unlimited rides with free insurance, free maintenance. It's a smart scooter with an app, so you can track it, lock it, etc. Right? And no commitment, right? You can cancel anytime. If you stay on for a year, you can upgrade the vehicle, right? You stay on for 2 years, you can keep the vehicle, right? So it's like a hardware as a service offering, and with a lot of kind of after sales care that you expect when you buy a car, but is not available today when you buy a scooter, right? And we're seeing exceptional demand for this product. All sorts of new pockets where there were no shared scooters available. So this is something we want to continue to push on, is like bringing more choice, more products or solutions so that we can reach everyone for their use case, their price point, their neighborhood, etc.
Are you seeing any trends on your customer base so far? Is it more 20 to 30s, early professionals? What are the demographics you're seeing so far?
I'd say, from a demographic standpoint, yes, we do skew a little bit younger, right? So millennials, Gen Z, are the core of the market. But even like those above 35, are like 20 to 30% of our users. A lot of people are discovering, the value that micromobility can bring. I think from an ethnicity standpoint, right, it's very representative of the populace, right? So we have, all like UAE, right, all ethnicities, Arab expats, Asian expats, European expats, Emiratis, right, and that's in UAE. Similarly in Qatar and Bahrain, where we're active, and it's quite pleasing actually to see, this organic sort of adoption of the service. Because to be frank, I mean, there is a hurdle to adoption because no one has grown up riding a scooter, right? I remember the first time I rode a scooter, like I was worried, right? Like I might fall down, I might lose my balance, I might get hurt, right? I might embarrass myself, right? And yet, we see this variety of people who get over that hurdle and try it, and then discover that this is something very useful that they love.
Yeah. And where are you seeing demand? Is it more orientated toward more tourist areas like maybe Abu Dhabi, Corniche, or is it office areas like maybe downtown Doha? Is there any disparity that you're seeing in the sort of leisure demand compared to the sort of peak traffic office demands?
So it is a function of where are the vehicles permitted. If they're only permitted in leisure areas, right? Then you'll see leisure rides, right? So it varies by city. In some cities, we do have that leisure kind of deployment zones, right? In others, like in Doha, we are like in downtown Doha. People are taking a lot of rides to and from the metro stations, right? They've launched their own metro system there. In Abu Dhabi, it's a mix. So you do see people who are taking their first ride, I guess, like on the Corniche, right? And that's generally like
Where it's safe, as you came back to earlier, where there's no cars, where it doesn't matter if you fall off.
exactly, and like first ride. I mean, generally people do like after hours, right? They don't risk a critical trip to an experiment, right? Like getting to work on time, getting to a meeting interview on time, getting to school on time, right? You're not going to do an experiment and try something new then. But like after work on the evenings, like you might try it out for the first time, and then you see this switch to kind of the functional trip. So like in Abu Dhabi, like Reem, Maria Island, Aldana, right? We see a lot of short distance trips there, which are functional, right? Getting to nearby POIs. What's interesting is there's a lot of it's not just substituting cars and taxis and some walking trips, right? It's also unleashing a lot of new demand, trips that never would have happened before, right? Because there was no good option available for how to get there, right? So actually, just last week, there was some research published from Emory University in the US, which they did an analysis of spending behavior in cities with shared e-scooters and cities without. And statistically, they showed that introducing shared micromobility creates a surge in local commerce because now people are able to get to stores and restaurants that were out of reach before, and that's like basically what we're getting at, like in the opening that you shared, that quote of mine, where mobility is a tax on the productivity of our cities. It's a means to an end, right? We move because we want to get somewhere to do something, right? And that's why it's a tax. It's a tax on our potential. And if we're able to reduce that tax, right, there's more things that we end up doing, such as going to these stores and buying things that we didn't, or having more time to work, or more time to nurture our families, or to learn, or to consume. It's very important, and it's something we need to think about as a city, as a society, right? How do we, maximize those objectives?
So that is a great point. And what do you think that we should be doing more from a government through the client, the consultant design teams, yourself as an operator? Um, as a collective industry, what do you think we should be doing more? Because essentially, I think everyone knows traffic congestion is a problem for multiple reasons, other than you losing a few hours every morning. It's air pollution, it's sustainability, it's embodied carbon, it's everything round about that. So, as a mobility industry, what do you think we should be doing collectively to promote e-scooters, public transport, a more sustainable transport mix?
I mean, the whole idea around sustainability and global warming is like that's a mankind sort of mission. But people are driven by self interest. Most purchasing behavior right? Is about like, what's in my personal interest, right? And it's a bonus if I'm doing something good for society, right? So we need to align the incentives so that people naturally skew towards this more benevolent behavior. And like the evidence actually is all out there. Like some of the things that I've talked about, right? Like mobility, better mobility enables a better economy. Mobility or transportation is the number one carbon emitter and contributor to local air pollution, not just global warming, but local air pollution, right, in your city. So, like, what do we do? What we need is we need to be bold, and we need to have courage, and we need to look at the facts objectively. The way things were done in the past aren't necessarily the way they need to be going forward. The status quo isn't necessarily the optimal way to do things, right? And the status quo is built on a 20th century archetype, the automobile. The automobile, of course, is a beautiful invention, right? That has created so much freedom for people, built around this industrial complex, retail business model. Hundreds of millions of cars are sold every year. A family, aspires to buy a car, take a loan to buy the car. After the house purchase, it's the second biggest ticket, right? And they pay it off over many years, and it's as a result, they're like, hey, this thing better solve all my needs because I'm paying so much money. It's got to solve all my use cases. And that's why you've got like the 5-passenger seats and the cargo area, the trunk for the suitcases and the groceries and the high top speeds to go on the road trips. But like we took a step back, the car is a bundle of use cases and it's a bundle of trips, right? Essentially, we are prepaying for, I don't know, like 20,000 trips. And if we look at the distribution of those trips, very, very small percentage of them require all the functionalities that the car provides. The majority of the use of the car is in cities and you're driving yourself, right? One passenger moving in cities, not going very fast because you're in traffic and not going very far. Let's stop optimizing for how do we move the most cars in cities. Let's optimize for how do we move the most people in cities because we know the trends are everyone is moving into cities. Urban populations are growing, right? And if everyone's getting cars, because that's what you build for, right? Build it and they will come. Then the problem is going to get worse. The congestion is getting worse, right? There's no space to expand the roads in a lot of cities, right? There's no money to expand the roads in many cities. The pollution is getting worse. The tax is getting higher and unevenly distributed. What are the facts? Right? The facts are, the most efficient way to move people is to squeeze them into a train, like sardines. But that you can't have a metro station, right, at every block. That doesn't make sense economically, and even like those who are using the metro, you don't want to stop every 10 seconds, right? It needs to be spread out across the city. You got to make it easy for people to get to the metro and to get off the metro, right? The first and last mile, like they say. And for that, I mean, the best solution, hands down, is micromobility. It's meant for that hub and spoke sort of system. The beauty of it is that micromobility plus public transit is like magic, right? Suddenly, so many more people can access, the metro systems, right? That cities have to spend a lot of money building, a lot of investment. It increases the utilization of those assets and the ROI on those assets. Right, and it reduces the number of people on the road, right, in cars, right. So it's a win-win-win. But to enable that, you need to rethink how do we allocate our space in our cities. The space in our cities is a public good. It doesn't belong to the car industry. It belongs to us, the residents of the city, the citizens of the city. How we choose to allocate that space is our responsibility. Right? Why are we committing 30% of our cities to cars? 30%, 70% is for everything else. 30% is just for cars. Living, breathing, working is the other 70%. It makes no sense, right? And this is the most valuable real estate in the world, urban real estate. It's in such scarce supply, high demand, right? If you start, like, if you reallocate one car lane for micromobility, you move 6 times the passengers, right? If that's our goal seek function, is passenger throughput, not car throughput, passenger throughput. Yeah, we should be repurposing streets everywhere, right? It's so obvious. Like a car, for example, used by like one and a half people, has 8 car parking spots in a city dedicated to that one car. Okay, and by the way, that car is idle 95% of the time, right? Just parked. Imagine if you repurposed one car park spot for micromobility, shared micromobility, you fit 30 vehicles used by 100 people. So that is an 800 to 1 ratio. It's a no brainer, right? So all we need is we need the courage to take space away from cars and give it back to the people. It's called people centric urban planning. And cities are doing this now all over the world, not because some kumbaya movement, but because the numbers make sense. It's good for the economy. It's good for the people, creating a more livable city, more productive city, more equitable city.
Yeah, so it leads to a good point, and I think what has been one of the challenges with e-scooters, they haven't had the proper infrastructure within cities. I said earlier, they're either seen to be as an accident waiting to happen, or they're solving the elusive last mile problem that you addressed there. So, where do they belong? Do they belong in their own lane that would require a significant change to city planning? Do they belong on the pavement, or do they belong in the road?
There's a false equivalency. I think there's a outsized attention on e-scooters, right? But if you look at, like, where's the real safety hazard, it's from the car, right? The car is the killing machine, right? Let's call it what it is, right? Number one killer of children in the U.S. is the car. We just accept it. And so, what is the risk of like riding an e-scooter or micromobility vehicle? Inherently, they are very safe because they're low momentum. Just the physics of it, right? Low mass and low speed, right? If you look at the data, right, the safety risk of riding an e-scooter is essentially equivalent to riding a bicycle, right? It's just when there's an accident on an e-scooter, like all eyes go on it. Oh my goodness, this is dangerous. We got to do something about it. And yes, we should. I mean, yeah, we should. Right? We should make it safer.
You hit on a good point there. It's all about perception. I mean, the aeroplane is probably the most safe mode of transport there is, but a lot of more people are anxious about being in an aeroplane for various reasons. But I think that the real point I was trying to get at is that the road users don't want them in the road. The pedestrians don't want them on the pavement. It's a new mode of transport. The cityscape hasn't quite adjusted to them yet. So we in the Middle East, you see here we have Doha Metro, Riyadh Metro, the expansion of the Dubai Metro. We have endless possibilities to try and improve our mix that maybe other places in the world don't, because they're a little bit too developed. So what should we be doing? Should we be trying to accommodate shared micromobility lanes? How should we be promoting this mix so we can actually do the end goal, which is take people out their cars?
I guess the end goal is like create more livable cities. Look, it's not expensive actually to make space for micromobility. There are many ways to repurpose some of the existing infrastructure for micromobility. Like what we saw from the pandemic globally, right? Hundreds of cities created emergency bike lanes on existing infrastructure at low cost. And so it just takes the will. There are many different methodologies to create the bike lanes or micromobility lanes on existing infrastructure. But it boils down to like, how do we prioritize our city space, right? You can create it on sidewalks, you can create it on roads, you could remove parking for cars and repurpose it for micromobility. There are many ways to do it, right? This needs to be a priority though. Right now, it is not a priority in our infrastructure allocation. Right? There's almost zero allocation relative to the opportunity. I would say, like, look at what other hundreds of cities did in like weeks when the pandemic started, as a way to enable, safe, shared, essential trips.
Yeah, and I think you touch on the pandemic there, which is a very good example. In a lot of countries, the mode shift was towards bikes, e-scooters, etc. And there was definitely a shift to the private car as well, which is unfortunate for people like us who try and advocate a life without them. But what are you doing to address the pandemic in Phoenix? You've rolled out throughout the pandemic. How do you ensure your vehicles are safe?
Again, it's not rocket science, just based on observation. The e-scooter is naturally the safest form of shared transport because there's natural social distancing. There's no human interaction. Right? You're driving yourself. You're not clustered together. The vehicles are outdoors, in the open air, right, under the sun's UV rays, heat, and humidity. There's even natural sanitization. Right? It's by far the safest shared transport option out there. Much safer than crowding together in a metro or a bus or using a confined space, taxi or ride hail or elevator or what have you. Right? This is why all these cities made these changes. Right? Now at Phoenix, we've taken it one step further. We've even introduced the world's first e-scooter with an inbuilt hand sanitizer. Now your safety is in your own hands, right? So it's been very effective and very popular, I think, in the market with our partners, cities, and consumers.
No, excellent. And I think one of the things to touch on, you've said many times about the your business model, shared mobility business models. Can often be difficult to monetize, Uber being the prime global example. Do you believe that e-scooters can be different in this region?
For sure. It's actually already profitable even today. Scooters and micromobility, are completely held to a double standard to everything else in mobility, right? Uber has never made a profit, invested billions and billions of dollars in losses, as have all the ride-hailing companies. And micromobility companies, on the other hand, many of them have now achieved positive contribution margins, EBITDA margins, even EBIT margins, while they are still in their formative, most nascent stages. Even at Phoenix, we're very proud of our financial performance. We've been contribution positive from our second week. Why have micromobility providers been able to do it when ride hailing hasn't? This really boils down to like what I was talking about earlier. Cost structure of an overqualified vehicle, being the car with a private chauffeur, can only get so low. It just doesn't work. The numbers don't work. Micromobility, 1% the mass of a car, fully electric, 90% energy efficiency versus 30% of the combustion engine, 100x per kilometer, by the way, scooter versus car. Self driving, no private chauffeur. Naturally, it's got a much, much, much lower of service, cost per kilometer.
Excellent. So there's just a few final questions that I want to ask you. Um, One of the main challenges I think have been for e-scooters is, look, they are electric. You do need to charge them. They do end up scattered in multiple places in your cityscape. So what's the strategy behind charging all these scooters so they're ready to go when the customer needs them?
So, as a shared scooter operator, we don't want the customer to worry about battery. It needs to be magic, handled behind the scenes, not an inconvenience for the customer. And that's what the shared scooters, right? And so we actually use swappable batteries, which means that anytime the battery is running low, we just replace it with a fully charged one, right? And that scooter is good to go, right? And leveraging technology, machine learning, and like human capital, like trained ops specialists, right? And that's like one paradigm, right, that we really believe in. You go to Asia, you see in some places you see the future. You have these like charging stations, like in Taiwan, for example, Gogoro. They've got these charging stations all over the city, right? Like gas stations, right? Where you can just swap out self-service, a battery, right, for fully charged one on the go, right? So whether that's like user-driven or like operator-driven, right? We'll have to see how that evolves, but I mean, it makes sense, right? That's where the industry will mature to. Like battery technologies are continuing to improve, density, capacity, range of the vehicles are improving, right? That I think this will become less of a hindrance.
Yeah. So just using that example you said there and going back to there is 8 parking spaces per one car. How many parking spaces are you foreseeing for one e-scooter, and how many batteries do you require for one e-scooter? What's the infrastructure that lies behind the mode of transport?
We need to incorporate micromobility into our building code. Like now, parking for cars is prevalent and it's accepted and it's expected. We need the same thing for micromobility. Like people complain about like clutter, right? That's because there's no parking, right? And we don't need a lot of parking. But every single building should have one car park spot repurposed for micromobility. Every single building. It needs to be less than 100 meters distance, right? And it doesn't take that much space. It just requires the will, right? And you will not have any clutter problem again.
And the batteries, just now in your operation, you say it's swappable batteries. To run that operation, how many batteries do you need per scooter?
It varies by city, right? It's a function of like, the capacity of the battery, the charging time for the battery, and also the utilization of the fleet.
And I'm sure you've had to answer this question many a time because a lot of people ask it. What happens mid-July when temperatures are high, humidity is high? Do you still expect people to be riding their e-scooters?
Absolutely, right? We still need to move, right? And we forget, right? Because we live in privilege. There's a majority of the populace, bottom of the pyramid, that is taking public transit. Here in the Middle East, especially, they're walking, they're taking the bus, they're taking the metro, and they are exposed to the elements. If you're building a mobility solution for everyone, you will be even more inclined to ride with this on a scooter, the breeze in your face in the hottest months than you would in other times of year.
No, great. And I think my final question, and I think it's maybe what some of the listeners will be thinking. Well, will I be tripping over an e-scooter anytime soon? Are they going to be abandoned at the side of the road? Currently, how are these being implemented? Are they dockless, docked?
We believe in reducing friction for the consumer so that they can really move with as much freedom as possible. The challenge with the docking or fixed parking solutions currently, right, is that there's insufficient density. You know, if you're not going door to door, you're going door to dock to dock to door, but you don't have a dock at every door. So what used to, like if you're trying to solve like a last meter like transportation need, like a 500-meter trip, right? But you got to walk 200 or 300 meters to the dock on both sides, right? It defeats the whole purpose. So that's where we're coming from, like in terms of like trying to really push the envelope on free floating solutions, right? But I think, like we've seen in some cities around the world, right, a two-tiered approach, right? In some like dense urban centers, right, you may have more restrictions in terms of fixed parking. You know, outside the urban center, right, more flexibility. And I think that's an approach that we advocate. Of course, we need a solution that works for everyone in the city, not just the micromobility riders, right? Because a lot of people are also not using those vehicles. It can be a hindrance for them. So I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of R&D that needs to be done as well, so that we can have an orderly yet responsive, flexible micromobility service.
Well, I think we can both agree that the e-scooters definitely have a place in mobility now, mobility in the future, a more sustainable mix, a more equal mix, as you've quite rightly pointed out there. So on that note, I think it brings us to the end of today's session. Jaideep, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
And signing off, my name is John Gillespie, and I've really enjoyed speaking with Jaideep today. And on behalf of WSP, thank you very much. E-scooters definitely have a place in mobility now, mobility in the future, a more sustainable mix, a more equal mix.